Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I have a special guest with us today. I think you may know him. He is, like I always say, he's one of the smartest guys I know. I love to pick his brain. And today we're going to talk about tribalism, which I think is very timely because we talk about this, about how people tend to join cults in some ways because they want a sense of community and a sense of belonging. So, eh, according to what I've read, and I want to pick Mark's brain about this, it's something that could be nature, could be nurture, could be both. So I'd like to get your input. Please put question or comment. I don't have Giorgio in the back today, but I'll be able to start your questions as I see them. And let's bring on our friend Mark Turi.
Hey, Marilyn,
Hello.
how are you? Hello,
Good. How are
everybody
you?
in the chat. Doing well, actually doing
Yeah,
quite well. How about yourself, Marilyn?
good. It's great to have you back so soon.
Yeah, no, I enjoy it. I love coming on your channel. I love your community, and a lot of your community has come to my channel, and I've been
Nice.
very, very happy with that because in the last couple of months I've had some great traction on my channel, and it's just really great. So I'm just happy that we've all kind of connected and are kind of becoming a regular guest, and
I
I'll have
love
you
it.
on my
Yes.
channel maybe sometime too. I keep
Yeah.
forgetting to do that. You should come on mine as well as I come on
Sure.
yours,
I
I guess,
mean, yeah, whatever you want to talk about. I just want to pull up your channel. Let me share a screen here. So here's your
right?
channel and
Yeah, at
your,
Mercury 123.
yep, Mark Turi 123. And head over if you're watching this on the replay or right now live, go over and hit like and subscribe if you haven't. You will not be disappointed. I
Thank
promise.
you. I hope not, but I'm pretty sure.
No, I love
We
talking.
have
I love
again.
listening to your talks. They're really
Oh,
interesting.
thank you.
So I
Yeah,
did
thanks. Yeah.
go ahead.
No, again, we have this delay because I'm all the way in Budapest, so don't worry about it. I was only going to say just I'm very thankful that we have a lot of people in both communities who are kind of interested in a lot of these topics that we talk about, and there's not a lot of it because it's long form and it's kind of like academic and intellectual, and I like the fact that we, have similar interests ourselves and then also the community. So that's all.
Okay, we're already getting some questions, so I'm gonna star some. So we're talking about tribalism, and I know that you do a lot of reading, a lot of studying, and into the history and the biology and the psychology of so many different civilizations and peoples. So I would love to hear your take on it, and I will kind of look for questions and kind of pelt you with them when we get them. so so
Yes.
yeah, you have the floor.
Well, yeah, no, this is a topic that's obviously very fascinating and has been probably for at least over a decade. If we look at global politics, one of the most major political um, incidences that started to divide our world was actually 9/11, and specifically the fallout of 9/11 with the war in Iraq. So before then, of course, there'd always been Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, etc. But starting in even in the 1970s with the religious right, there had been some divides. But for example, if we're talking specifically about religion, probably before the year 2000, it was not uncommon to have like Democrats in conservative Protestant churches and Republicans in more liberal or mainline Protestant churches. And the same goes with in Judaism. There were probably more political Republicans and conservatives in the Reform movement, and probably more Democrats and liberals in like Orthodox movement. And around 9/11, people really started to quote dig in their heels into these tribalisms, and we really started to feel that. And of course, now with social media, and now with what's going on in the United States over the past 10 plus years, unfortunately, a lot of that has been exported to my country, and I'm not just talking about Hungary where I live, but specifically Canada is becoming more polarized. But
Mhm.
Germany is, Hungary is, and we seem to be more extreme in our polarization to the point where younger generations, Gen Zs, and even my generation, I'm a millennial, I'm an older millennial, mind you, but we don't want to date or get married to someone who has an opposite political opinion, which I think is ridiculous, right? Like, I think that's absurd. I
Mhm.
understand we're talking about extremes, but if you love someone, who cares? And growing
Yeah.
up, my grandparents' generation, it was not uncommon for Democrats and Republicans to marry each other. It used to just be on religion. Catholics married Catholics, Protestants married Protestants. Nobody cares about that anymore. If you're Hindu and you marry a Jewish person, or if you're Christian and you marry a Buddhist, nobody cares about that anymore. But now we're dividing our lines on politics. And over the past like 10 years plus, there have been some really great books about this. One of the great books that I've read is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, who's also wrote The Coddling of the American Mind and The Anxiety Generation. He's a social psychologist, and he looks at, again, how politics, social media, polarization, and so forth is dividing people. He's not just someone who complains. He's a social scientist, so he gives actual
Mhm.
like policies and things that people can do. So it's quite positive. But obviously, if we're looking at just what's going on today, we have to sort of structure that into a more macro perspective, because there's obviously a lot more going on than just today, or just what happened 20 years ago after 9/11, war in Iraq, etc. There's more. I mean,
Yeah.
there's more than just the Black Lives Matter movement. There's more than Trump. There's more than all that kind of stuff. And so what I like to do is take the two extremes, right? I always like to do that. I always start with that. Take the two most extreme positions from one side to the next, and then try to figure out what, not just what the middle is, but what our multiple perspectives are. Because it's easy to just find the middle and say, well, half of the extreme and half of the extreme are right, and we're going to put them together. That's not exactly what I like doing. I like to kind of look at different things. So, um, if we talk about that, well, we have to look, as you mentioned, between like nature, nurture.
Mhm.
We have to look at the difference between, evolution and biology versus society and psychology. And in philosophy, this can be kind of broken down into what is referred to as essentialism. And an essentialist perspective is the biological, the nature view, and then the constructivist, which is the nurture or societal view. And that essentially just means essential comes from what are we in essence of ourselves? What is the biological essence of a human and human society and so forth? And then, of
Mhm.
course, social constructivism, pretty self explanatory. It just means reality is socially constructed. And so, because it's socially constructed, discrimination, tribalism, racism, sexism, bigotry, those are all that will stem from a social constructivist perspective.
So what
So
I think,
again, we yeah,
just one second, I just want to ask as I go along if I can ask you to clarify some things. So when you're talking about, so number one, this is not meant to be a political discussion. We're just
sure,
talking about the construct of society. We're not, weighing
yep,
in on political, things. But I mean, it's
exactly.
obvious that there are a lot of schisms, there are divides, and it's, it seems to be not getting any better. So when you talk about essentialism, I'm thinking about, especially back in the day, it was essential to have a tribe because if you were alone, you would die. You had no way of really taking care of yourself. It was more of a protection and a necessity, right? And
Mhm.
that you think of it as in life or death. But then as people start to evolve or start to um, I guess get a sense of self, a sense of the group, and all that. Um, do you think that people just get like afraid of the outside, views? Because and that's how, I think I got into a cult because I felt like I had found somebody like-minded, a group like-minded.
Mhm. Mhm. Again, the different perspectives here is that if we're looking at the biological essentialist perspective, the idea is, and I've said this on your stream before, I've said this on mine, Homo sapiens have been around maybe 200,000 years, give or take. We all kind of descend from the Horn of Africa. And you're right, if we had only been on our own as individuals, we wouldn't have survived. So we've always survived in communities. And there's also a lot of evidence that when our early Homo sapien ancestors would, let's say, encounter an other, um,
Mm,
there was always some apprehension. So, for example, that other could have been a scout for another tribe, which meant to kill your tribe and take your resources, or it could have been a trader who just wanted to trade with you. And of course, there was no language, so it would have been very difficult to know who was who at
right.
one point. And so that's the idea of social or evolutionary psychology, at least, and evolutionary biology will say that we had to determine who was, a trader and a friend versus, and I mean trader as in some like a merchant, let's say,
Right. Not
and
a
then who
creature, a
was
trader. Yeah.
exactly not the other trader, yeah, and then who
Yeah.
was like a scout or someone who was duplicitous. And
Hmm.
so their idea is because we had to evolve thinking that way, we it's like a pebble, dropping into a river. It creates this ripple effect where now 200,000 years later, we encounter others. Okay, they're probably not either scouts or merchants. They're probably, other people that don't look like us. And we certainly see that throughout history when, colonial peoples went to North and South America and the Pacific and they saw, these different people and they were others. And of course, they
Hmm.
assumed that they were less than. And this, of course, then prompted them to make conversions and unfortunately with genocides with like Taínos and Carib peoples and whatnot. So that's a part of that. But if we shift it and we go to the other side, if we go to the constructivist view, that idea is basically not that biology doesn't, like not that our memories and our collective psychology isn't influenced by that, but it's more for the fact that in the past maybe almost 200 years, maybe a little more than 200 years, we've had nationalism. And, if we think of our ancestors even up to 500 years ago or 300 years ago, we were living in feudalism. And before that, we were living in these sort of smaller communities. Like, even though there were larger kingdoms like the German kingdom, the French
Right.
kingdom, the Zulu kingdom, we were feudal. So we were only really loyal to a small group of people, probably up until around, the middle to late 19th century. So because of that, social constructivists will say, well, now that we have nations of millions, tens of millions, and hundreds of millions and billions of people, right? China and India have over a billion people. I come from Canada. We have around 40 million. The United States has around 330, 340 million.
Hmm.
The smallest nation in the world, okay, it's Vatican City. There's 2,000 people, but those small states are very rare. Most
Yeah.
are in the millions. And we've never actually had that many people in our community. And so a social constructivist will look at what were the policies that were in place, what was the society saying to sort of build those things together. And in nationalism, we do find an increase in a large perspective of us and them, because now we're in nations. So now
Hmm.
it's not just my lord versus your lord, my duke versus your duke, and then some king would come in to smooth it over. Now it's like World War I. It's like France and Germany, and they're all united. Italy is united. Great Britain is united. So and there's millions of people, right? And in some cases, like in Austria-Hungary, we were all different, but we were still united under a banner. And
Hmm.
there's might be something that does go back to our social psychology, but a constructivist or I should say, our evolutionary psychology. But a social constructivist would say, no, this is just policy, this is just politics, this is just things that have been imprinted onto us well after the fact. And again, this is really anybody's guess. Like it's probably a mixture of both. And each
Right.
individual will have a mixture of both, and each society is going to have a mixture of both. But that's, you know, that's really the whole point of it, is that it's a mixture of a lot of different moving parts. These are just the two extremes. And so why we get so polarized, I think, is because of both of them. I do think that as human beings, sure, we've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out who's friendly and who isn't friendly, because we needed, we needed to make fire. So you make fire with wood and rock. And if they didn't exist in your area, well, you had to trade with people. And then eventually you had to make the wheel and so forth and
Mhm.
so forth. And then eventually, again, we're in these multi-million people communities or billions of people, and it's very odd for us. And I don't think that most of us can really determine or discern between us versus them. It's just so easy for us to be, to have someone who's an authority figure point to a group of people and say, well,
Mhm.
they are them, they are lesser, they are evil. Let's get them, let's do that, or whatever. And I did mention just one thing before, is that one of our commenters here, and forgive
Yep.
me, it'll be up here, mentioned sports. Sports is the
Yes, I did.
ultimate
I starred
tribalism,
that.
right?
Very good
Like,
game
and
so
that's
yeah.
pretty benign, though, right? For the most part, it's benign. But even sporting events, if you go to like England or the United Kingdom, there will be gangs of hooligans who will beat each other up in a soccer match. So in hockey, by the way, just recently, the United States and Canada faced each other in a hockey game. There were 3 fights in the first 10 seconds. I
I
mean,
believe it.
I grew up in Canada where there were multiple stories of parents watching hockey games and getting in fights, like two fathers getting into fist fights, watching their 10-year-old sons play hockey. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter if it's religion, if it's politics, if it's sports, if it's the arts. Like,
Mhm.
there, maybe because of competition, maybe there's something inherent in us. Maybe it is something also social, because there's nothing evolutionary about necessarily about sports. Sports are mostly constructed by our societies,
Yeah.
but like, who knows? And so that's where I find it to be very interesting,
Do you
because
think
there are
things like
obviously people on either side.
do you think things like sports and competition is kind of a like a constructive way to act out the inherent competitive kind of tribal instincts? And that was one thought I had, and I'll hold the other thought because
Mhm.
the other one had to do with the nationalism and how big
Mhm.
things get. But yeah, I think maybe it's both, because you can take a inherent bent towards tribalism, and kind of pulling into your certain group, and then maybe like, okay, this is one thing. When I had children, I was reading after we left the call and I was reading like how to raise children. It said like little boys and some girls, it's not like a sexism thing, but like to teach them how to take risks, because a lot of times they want to take risks in a safe way. So instead of like, I wanted to just wrap them in bubble wrap, like all three of my kids, even my girl, like she would take risks sometimes too, and it was like, oh my god, I just want to protect them. But no, it's healthy to kind of steer them towards something. So maybe things like sports. I always wonder, like, why do we always have to be so like rivals and all that? So maybe it is like an inherent thing, but of course it can go awry, like 3 fights in the beginning of a hockey team or hockey
Mhm.
game. And I'm sure it has to do with some political you know unrest between the two countries right now, not to
Yeah,
mention
just
any details.
of course, and just to be
Yeah.
brief, because again, I don't like single splaining to parents, but I have read that the one of the best lessons a child can learn is to actually put their hand on a stove and to feel the fact that it burns and to get a
Yeah.
burn, because it's going to teach them not to put their hand on the stove. If you, as a parent, tell them not to, they're more likely to do it. And then if they prevent them, they're not going to learn. So, yeah, you have to have bumps and bruises. And this is why, like Jonathan Haidt will say, this overly sort of protective society. And again, being a millennial,
Mm-hmm.
the baby proofing, yeah, some of it you need to, like over electrical sockets, okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But if it's just a burn, if it's just a cut or whatever, it's actually good. And I remember at one point, and my mom told me this, it's like I was the type of kid where she wanted to baby proof everything and then just decided, you know what? If he's going to chew gum off the dirty road, he's going to do it. If he's going to, if he's going to just do something, he's going to do it. And I got to
Now,
be honest with
are you
you,
an only child,
I
or are
learned
you a
pretty good.
first? Like, what?
No, I
Where do
have
you?
I have an older sister, 4 years
Okay,
older. But being a boy,
that makes a lot of
right?
sense
We
because
chew.
my
Yeah,
first kid was in bubble wrap, and then by the third kid, it's like whatever, eat over a
yeah.
ton of dirt a
It's
day.
like who cares? Exactly. But even girls like are less likely to put things in their mouth. Like it's really weird, right? So not to say that that's person per person. It's just
Right.
it's a generalization. When
Yeah.
we go to sports, though, um, again, sports is a combination of all these things, right? So the first is you could look at a biological thing and say, like, well, people like to win, and so forth. But it's very much social. I mean, the people have been playing sports for a long time. Sure, our ancestors have been playing sports, but the sports culture that we have today is based on mostly, political lines. We have cities or regions or counties or countries,
Hmm.
playing other groups, and it's almost always two, right? Like every sport you have, cricket, lacrosse, ice hockey, basketball, baseball, it's two teams, right? Even in
Yeah.
the martial arts, it's two teams. You talk about the Olympics, okay. You have, marathon running. There'll be more than one country and sprinting. Okay, track and field, a little different. But for the
Hmm.
most part, most popular sports is like, one city versus another. So when I was growing up, I grew up in Toronto, and we have the Toronto Maple Leafs. Their greatest rival is the Montreal Canadiens. Why? Well, they were among the first six national hockey teams that go back over 100 years. And they were also the first two Canadian teams. There's also political stuff with English Canada versus French Canada. When we had the referendum about 20 years ago on whether or not Quebec was supposed to separate, that year there was a lot of political tension between the Toronto Maple Leafs and, of course, the Canadiens. So it's not just on the surface stuff. There's a lot of integral parts to these competitions, and for the most part, I think they are benign. But as
Hmm.
you mentioned, every once in a while, you will get people who have a little too much alcohol. And they're so, like, if it's a big rivalry, like in football, like in rugby or cricket and some of these things, it really just festers up this, I don't know, internal evolutionary,
Yeah.
kind of thing where people get so serious about it and angry and elated, and it
Yeah.
can be like a powder keg.
Yeah. I like to take these type of studies and see how I can apply them to
Mhm.
my situation, to my everyday life. And as I'm hearing you talk, I can't help but think about like movements, right? Like this, we are in
Yeah.
a anti-cult, post coercive control space, right? We're fighting against Scientology, but also in my case, the mind control that I was brought up in, and also dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and all kinds of things
Yeah.
that come along with that, autoimmune diseases, things like that. And I think that as a movement gets bigger, I'm just seeing, as I go along, that people's, they gravitate towards different types of people. They find people that are a little more like-minded than them, people with different priorities in within a movement. And I've been guilty of this myself, of like kind of being afraid to reach out to somebody that I feel like is hostile towards me or towards what what I'm prioritizing, or somebody that I really, really am friendly with and loyal to or just really close to. So I get the kind of mama bear thing. So
Mhm.
I think it's a good thing to look at because it's it seems like such a overwhelmingly bad thing, but at the same time I think that it's like it is kind of natural, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing as long as we don't make it into, a us against them really nasty. And it has happened, but kind of I like to pull back and kind of look at the whole picture and think, okay, well, some people don't think like me. It's okay. I don't have to be coochie coo with them, but they're here. They have a similar, way. Like, we all want to survive, right? So I'm thinking of it as a worldview too. It's like, okay, we have all these different countries. We don't have to hate each other. Just live and let live. So it's easier said than done, but it kind of helps me to kind of look at the big picture and then kind of roll it back to how I can maybe even just affect my own way of looking at it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, of course. And the only thing that we can do, in my opinion, is on an individual level because we're not in control of other people. So,
Mhm.
unless, of course, we have some position of power and we take responsibility and sort of pass all of this legislation that does minimalize polarization, which would mean like everything that someone says, regardless of their authority, stance or whatever, gets
Mhm.
fact checked. And we have media literacy. I also think
Yeah.
religious literacy, like learning just basics of religious studies, basic concepts of science, economics, like all these kinds of things. But we can really only do that with ourselves. So, not, I
Right.
don't want to get political here, but one of the things that's going on in the US is there might be a closing of the Department of
Mhm.
Education, which means it goes back to the states. In Canada, we don't have a federal Department of Education. Everything goes
Mhm.
by the provinces.
Mhm.
So you could say, okay, well, in certain areas are going to focus on certain things versus other things. We might, take away certain things or whatever. And so this is why it's very like hard on a macro level. So as a person, as an individual, the first thing is when it comes to like media sources and when it comes to groups, the more the better. So if you're
Yeah.
only
Mhm.
listening to
Yep.
one media source, especially if that media source is a commentary or
Yep.
if it's an opinion, that is not as good as if you have more than one source and
Mhm.
it can be balanced between left, center, right. It's the same with groups. Okay, if all you do is go to one church, even it could just be like a regular old Methodist church, which is constructive, right? Well, also going to a crochet club or going to a public swimming pool or playing cards with people. Like, don't just have one group, just
Yep.
branch out into different things, whether it's based on social hobbies, whatever. And I think most people have a pretty, that have that established, will have pretty good, well rounded idea. But what's happening now is it's far too easy to find a very specific uh, group that is catered to your needs based on your algorithm. And so
Mhm.
people then will withdraw from those social groups because they might have a disinterest in one person. So you have a crochet club of 10 people and you're the only one who's in one political category and everyone else is in the other one. You're
Right.
like, who cares? Just sit there and crochet. Like, that's the
Yeah,
point of it.
exactly.
But it
Yeah.
seems to be bleeding into these hobbies, which I think is wrong. Same with relationships. So the advice just being, the more the better.
Mhm.
The more groups that you have, whether they are religious or not,
Yep.
hobby based, social based, card games, whatever, and then
Mhm.
also read multiple sources, and at least that way you have more perspectives. And
Yep.
the last point just being, I know for myself, when I hear something, sometimes for the first time, and it's opposite of what I think, my first reaction is, what the F?
Yeah.
But
Right.
if you hear that more than one time, you're like, okay, that's not so bad. And that's what people need
Yeah.
to do. So that's something that you can only do as an individual.
Yeah, that's something that really helped me in deprogramming and coming out of the cult, was realizing that all these people that were worldly heathens that were going to hell, they were, so many of them were such nice people. you know?
Yep.
And oh, those, you know, those homosexuals. Oh my God, some of the most amazing, beautiful people are gay that I've met. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? But that was how I was raised. So that was something that
Yeah.
really helped me was it doesn't matter what their religious or whatever, you know, their lifestyle, whatever. It doesn't matter. It matters that they are decent people that are, you know, just able to like get along in life and be nice to others, and that's all. So yeah, that totally makes a lot of sense to me because um I'm looking at it as like there's things that you can meet on like crochet, you know, like I love this I've been talking about this Elise Rose crochet lady. I'm watching all kinds of videos from her. I have no idea. I don't know where she lives. I think she's
Yeah.
American. She has a southern accent. I don't know if she what political party. I don't give a shit. I just
Of
she's
course. Yeah.
great. She does great yarn reviews and she's a great crocheter and I get some good tips from her. So that's all I care about, you know. So yeah, I totally get that. I think that with the way, and I don't want to get political. I see my husband's in here. I love you, honey, but do not get political. we we are, I mean, Duncan and I are mostly on the same page politically. He's a little more to one side. I'm a little more in the middle and maybe off to the other a little bit. But one thing we do at night, and I know it's funny because a lot of people are like, "Where are you at night?" I laugh and call it my trad wife hours because I like to cook dinner and spend time with my husband at night, you know. But every third night or so, we want to catch up on the news, and it's so depressing and horrible, right? But so what we usually do, we'll watch a right wing news cycle, a left wing news
Hmm.
cycle, and then we'll watch some
Hmm.
YouTube, which there are so many middle ground
Hmm.
outlets now. I love it how social media has gotten to where it's not just the cable networks, it's all kinds.
Yeah.
So we'll actually draw from all kinds of different resources to form our own opinion. And I think that's
Yeah.
been a very healthy thing for us to, you
And
know, to
that's,
do.
by the way, that's doing a lot more than most people. You're probably doing more than 95% of people. More than 95%. I can't, maybe upwards of 99. I mean, I'm kind of like this too because, I have my own, news or whatever things going on. I try to read from multiple sources, but as someone who spent a lot of time studying the media in college, community college, I'm kind of enough for me. I know what news is news. I know what isn't, and so I usually try to get from Google, and then I look at the
Mhm,
news sources that I like or that I think are reliable, that are actual
mm,
news sources, and then
mhm,
yes, I'll read some articles, and then of course, like you say on YouTube, you have a lot more commentary mixed in with news, which again can be
mm,
helpful. And but
yeah,
I would say like yeah, devoting a whole day to doing something like that's more than most people. And it's really not a lot of people's fault. Like in the younger generation now in Gen Z, they are bombarded with so much information that the human
yeah,
brain cannot comprehend.
mhm,
And they're also kind of scared that if they take a side and it's the wrong side, that that's going to live with them for the rest of their lives. It's horrendous
yeah,
what we've done to that generation. And I do
yeah,
think that there's a lot of resilience in that generation, but there's too much going on. And so this is another thing again Jonathan Haidt talks about in his latest book, The Anxiety Generation, which it's now leading to a lot of mental health issues because there being so much pressure. But for my generation, thankfully, and for the generations before, we're a little bit more easygoing on that. Like we would know, like, okay, if it's coming from some crackpot conspiracy site, it's not reliable. Don't go down those rabbit holes, but it's too much for them. And again, this is why I
mhm,
say even for older people too, because some older people get caught in rabbit holes online as well. No one
yeah,
is immune to it. Um, but it's one of those things where, yeah, as long as you just have more, like you say, more than one political slant, the New York Times slants to the left, the what's it called? The Wall Street Journal slants to the right. Read both. Like who cares?
yeah,
How's that going to harm you? Same articles.
yeah,
You can read the same article
and
and it'll be on the same story. It'll have different
yeah,
wordings. but it's
Right.
also good to do that, you know?
And what I found too is that it's a little bit extreme for people to say this news is always wrong or always to the right or left,
Yeah,
always to be,
yeah,
always this, and I'm like, it's not true
no,
because I
no.
watch both, and they do sometimes make their guy look bad or their girl look
Yep,
bad, you know. And so it's
of
like, okay,
course.
I can have respect for that instead of just buying into the stereotypical fear mongering. And I think that's one thing that I know it's one thing you brought up towards the end of your presentation on your channel was how fear drives a lot of this polarization. And that
Oh,
is
yes.
absolutely true. I mean, even for me, sometimes I'm afraid to trust somebody who doesn't seem to have the same, values as me, or is
Mhm.
really, and I'll be honest, even in this space, is really going hard on somebody that I like and care about and that I know really well. And then they'll excuse somebody who actually has a criminal record. And I'm like,
Yeah,
what the fuck is happening here? So it's very hard for me. It's like I want to other them and their friends.
yep.
Yeah, and like those are the two things that I really, stuck out. The two words was fear and the othering thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, again, I'll just give a broad example because I don't want to be too specific. But let's say there's a war going on and you have two sides and someone has a connection to one of those sides. There's nothing wrong with getting the news from the side that makes you more comfortable, but you shouldn't ignore that the fact that the other side also has news, and we're more likely to trust the sources that we have a connection to. And that can be an
Mhm.
emotional connection, a familial connection, a personal connection, where we kind of ignore the other side because the other side might say something that might scare us, or it might call into question certain things. And everybody has this, like everyone has a level of sensitivity that for some people is greater than others, but it exists. And so like that's the thing. You have to be able to say like, okay, you're right. This thing might upset me, but if you're presented with a fact, let's say, of something horrible happening, and it's not your side, you have to be able to at least accept a fact. And I find when people can't do that, it's because either they're very scared, a combination of being scared or being dug in. So they kind of
Yeah,
make it a moral thing. Like I've
yeah,
chosen this side. I'm scared to look at the other side, but I make the excuse that like my side is the moral side. I'm on the right side. And so it's often called a genetic fallacy, which means that you what's the word? You don't like a source because you don't think that what's the word I'm trying to look for? Anyway, the genetic fallacy is that if I give you a fact and I say, whatever news source said this, and you just go, oh, it's wrong because I don't like that news source. So it's like, no, but it doesn't matter, right? So this genetic fallacy is what I'm saying. It's like you don't like the source in which the fact is coming from, so you ignore the fact that it's a fact. You know what I
right, right.
mean? And
Yeah,
that
exactly.
but
I've
a lot
I've
of
heard
people
I've
have
heard
that.
people. There's one channel I like to watch on YouTube. I won't say who it is because they're very polarizing. Only because they're
Yeah.
so middle ground. So the
Yeah.
people on one side are like they're way on the other side. Then the other side are like they're way on the other side. And so if you're accused by both extremes of being way
Yeah.
on the other side
Yeah.
of them, then I'm like maybe you're in a good place. Because
Yeah,
maybe you're a little
that's
more
actually
open-minded. Yeah,
well, there's a saying that I like, which is when liberals call you conservative and conservatives call you liberal, you're
it happens
doing
to me all the
something
time.
right.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But,
Because it means
people
that
are
they no one
people.
can pigeonhole you, and when you can't be
Yeah.
pigeonholed, then that's a good thing because people sort of expect it. Like if you have a label, doesn't matter what that label is, right?
Mhm.
Political label, religious label, whatever. Someone is going to expect you to be a certain way. So that means that everything that comes out of your mouth has to align in a certain way. But if you
Yeah.
kind of contradict that, people they don't get their heads around it, and that's to
Yeah.
me a good thing. Like if you can't wrap your head around something, it means that it's like the Socratic method. It's like you've given
All
them a
right.
little bit of doubt, so they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize that someone who believes in X can also believe in Y." And then your brain starts to change, and it's actually a good thing, I think,
Right.
anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I live in a very small town of 700 people in Vermont,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's pretty much half and half, politically divided, and
Right?
sort of to an extreme. And Duncan and I are two of the kind of rare people that are kind of in the middle in our town,
Yeah,
and so people kind of know that. But it's funny because I'll vote a lot different than I would nationally, because when
yeah.
you're talking about your neighbor who is a great
Mhm.
neighbor, completely believes something opposite what you believe, but they would be there. I mean, if you have to call the police there, you're waiting like an hour and a half for the sheriff to show up. But all I got to do is call my neighbor; they're here in 30 seconds. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's true. And like if somebody was trying to, unalive you, it would definitely be my neighbors that would help. So, and they don't believe like me at all. But like I said, when it comes down to community, they're great people. And I know that locally, they're going to just make sure that our roads are fixed. They're going to make sure the kids are educated. They're going to make sure, because they have kids and cars and all that too. So I think that when it comes down to it, we're all human. I have actually some things starred to that, some
Of
comments
course, of
from all
course.
of you start even to that effect, is like, hey, we're all human. So yeah, I think it's been a
Well,
a
I
great
just
thing to
wanna
look
make,
into.
if I might, just when we go back to religion, I just wanna make just a few small points. So,
Yeah.
when I was in Scientology, our us versus them, which was very prominent in everything we did, was that there was Scientologists and then there were wogs. And I know wog is a derogatory term, so if that offends anybody, I apologize. But that is an us versus them. So a Scientologist is someone who is helping the planet, help clearing the planet. You're basically on top. And the other people, the W words, they
Mhm.
are, plugged into the matrix, mindless automatons, aimless in life, doing nothing,
Yeah.
and we're on top. In very radical, extreme Orthodox Jewish communities, and I hate this, they have two Yiddish terms. One is called der jüdische Welt, which means the Jewish world, and der Goyim Welt, which means the world of the Goyim or the Gentiles. And so it's very much an us versus them,
Yeah.
because the Goyim, again, they're like plugged into the matrix. They don't pray, they eat pork, and then there's the Jews. And by the way, according to most Orthodox, I'm Goyim, which is ridiculous, but that's how brainwashed some of them are, if that's the word. And then you have a lot of people in the Christian world, specifically evangelicals, who may look at the saved versus the sinners, and it's the same thing, right? One group is on top because they've done something that really is important to them, fine, but it's also metaphysical. Who knows if they're true? And then you have the people at the bottom. So that could be, people who drink alcohol, who are Christians who drink alcohol.
Mhm.
Well, they're still sinners because your church or the church or whatever says no
Yep.
drinking alcohol. So it's the same thing, and there's a lot of infighting as well. But
Yep.
I just wanted to put that out there as things that are very easy to look at, right? This is the black
Yep.
and white thinking. However, sometimes it's not so easy, and you have to kind of be careful when another group of, you're on one side, but either one group or multiple groups are on the other side. When again, a healthy constructive group, religious, secular, political,
Yep.
whatever, basically says that we're all people. And then after
Mhm.
that, you could say, hey, maybe we disagree with what they believe in, but in the end, we're all people. No one's better than anyone else. And
Right.
so that idea of like arrogance and hierarchy of who's
Yep.
moral and immoral, that when it's very destructive, then it can get into cult like thinking, and that's a real red flag.
Mhm.
So that's just something
Yeah,
to look.
absolutely. Because you hear certain, buzzwords and phrases lately about, um, just being like
Immigrants.
morally, yeah, morally superior, or virtue signaling, things like that.
Yeah,
And it's to kind of make other people feel, less than, or not as enlightened, or not as intelligent, or whatever. And that makes me want to just, fight against that. But see where, like in religion, with, where I grew up, it was like anybody that doesn't believe like us, whether they even say they're Christians or not, they could be like, there's the worldly people. And then
Yeah.
there's the Christians that aren't enlightened, and they might get to heaven by the skin of their teeth. They might not, but they are carnal Christians, fleshly Christians. There
Right.
was all kinds of groups of them, but it was still us against them. It's like we have the
Mhm.
pure, it's kind of like Scientology, and then the squirrels. You know what I mean? The squirreling
Yeah.
Scientology. We have the pure, unadulterated truth. And I think that that's something that, like, we have to, as humans, have to guard from, because there's that pull to go to the extremes,
Mhm.
and extremes, I found, are bad, are very bad.
Any extreme,
Oh.
even looking at the world as just the essentialist perspective or just a constructivist perspective, like it's not true. Like, okay, yes,
Mhm.
we have been on Earth for 200,000 years, but just because someone is afraid of a snake, there's more than one reason why you can be afraid of a snake. And this is why sometimes I think it's kind of intellectually lazy to just say, well, it's evolutionary biology and it's evolution, therefore it's all true. Or to say, well, no, we were all just born as blank slates and everything's social. It's like, no, there's so much more going on. So you can't
Yeah.
just be lazy and pick one extreme side and then claim that every single thing that they say. And I know this because, when I left Scientology, I, like a lot of people do, you start reading about quote unquote science, and then you start, LARPing like a scientist. That's science. This is, turns out nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. No offense, I don't want to swear, but they don't.
Hey,
And
go
so
for
evolutionary biology, science, they have limits, and so does social science. Like,
it. Yeah.
everyone has a limit because in the end, we all have to process it through a human brain, and it turns out that, our human brains are imperfect and flawed. Doesn't mean that we can't do good. Doesn't mean we can't attempt to do good. It also doesn't mean that, things like the scientific method don't work. They do. But again, we're sort of worshiping these ideas in the need for answers. And sometimes there's just not going to be an answer.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter where it comes from.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my thing. So that kind of humbled me down to be like, well, you can read all these books and books and books and books and books, but you should also be reading other books, like that's
Mhm.
another thing too, right? Like, you got to read more. If you're going to read something on evolutionary biology, read it, and then read about, social science and how societies do inform our beliefs. Maybe not the food we eat or maybe whatever like that, but like, there's a lot going on, and there's multiple perspectives. It's never just one thing. And people who write books, they have an incentive to tell you that, they know what they're talking about, and you should only look at their book because you just bought their
Right.
book and whatever. But you kind of have to ignore that kind of convincing, and just,
Yeah.
as an adult, no one's there to tell you, but you
Yeah.
kind of have to do that. So that's the
I'm
whole
laughing because I quit smoking 9 months ago, and it just so happens
wow.
that the same book that helped Kelly Copter quit vaping a
Right.
year ago helped me. But
Wow.
I've resisted the urge to become an evangelist for this Alan
Right.
Carr book, because it's
Mhm.
not going to work for everybody, and it,
Yeah.
it only worked
Mhm.
for me partially in the fact that it's called the easy way to quit smoking. To me, there's no easy way, and this wasn't easy.
Yeah.
But it did
Yeah.
help me to kind of rewire the way I thought about
Yep.
smoking, and how I
Mhm.
was always just relying on willpower, which I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to. So for me, it was helpful to be able to not think of it from that perspective, but to think of, okay, what if I were to do it? You know what?
Yep.
I don't think I want to, because if I do one, there's no such thing as one drag or one cigarette for me. So that has
Right.
helped me kind of reason with myself and tell myself, you don't really need that. You think you do. But I can't pound it into other people like, this is going to be the one thing that's going to help you. I don't know that, and I can't claim that, but I would love for everybody to try it that is addicted to smoking, because why not?
I agree. I mean, but that's the thing, you're rewiring your psychology, because that's another thing. Addiction, and that's another issue. Can addiction be
Mhm.
passed down? Yes. alcoholism, if you have an alcoholic parent or grandparent, you are more likely to become an alcoholic. It doesn't mean you will, but
Right.
it means you are more likely to do that. So addiction can be brought down through your genes. However, if you grow up, okay, let's say one of your parents moves to Saudi Arabia or someplace where there's no alcohol, your social conditions and your religious conditions can prevent you from being an alcoholic. But you might also get addicted to something else. And again,
Yeah.
it's two things at once. So the fact that you were able to at least quit the consequence of those things, that's number one. How you did it, yeah, it can be over a number of different methods. You know, some people have to chew the nicotine gum until they wean
Mhm.
themselves down. Vaping may help if you start with a high amount of nicotine and then wean your
Yeah,
way
with
down.
me, I knew I had
You
to
know,
go
but
cold turkey. Yeah.
in the end, it's a habit, and to
Mhm.
break a habit, you it's not willpower. Willpower is BS. Some
Yeah.
people can quit cold turkey. Some people have to wean down. But the end result is that you're off of it, and that's the good thing. How you do it is going to be up to
Right.
you. It's going to
Right.
be a mix of your genetics and your society. Like you
Mhm.
probably walk by, convenience stores that sell cigarettes. They're probably all around. I mean, cigarettes are sold everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
So technically, there's nothing stopping you. However, you've made that decision in your head. And so
Yeah.
again, there's just multiple things going on. And so that's why I kind of like these sort of big conversations, like philosophical conversations, because they
Yeah.
don't really have concrete answers. And I kind of like that now as I'm getting
Yeah.
older.
So would you like to take some questions and comments? I
Yeah,
got some
absolutely.
start.
And I just wanted
So,
to say hi to Joe DeCeppo
oh, hi, Joe. Good
and
to see
Peter
you.
Anderson. Yeah, and Peter Anderson. Some of my Mark
Hi,
Apostles
Anderson.
are in the crowd tonight.
You're Mark Fossil? I love that.
Yep.
So you got your own little cult going on over there, Mark.
Well, it's very constructive, in my opinion. It's a very constructive
It's
cult,
a
which it can be. It's very
discipleship
constructive.
ministry.
That's right.
I love it. Okay, so before I get into the questions and comments, I just want to put this up for our friend Joel McCoyne. Hello, all. Just dropped in for a bit. To anyone who was here yesterday, my mother did pass away. I'm making all the arrangements, so I'm a bit busy. You all have been kind. Thank you for that. And we love you, Joel. If you see this on the
Yeah,
replay, lots of love to
absolutely. Our
you.
thoughts are with you.
Yes, it's not easy to go through losing a loved one, and if everyone can put a heart in the chat for our friend Joel, he's really a big part of our community. Just love him to pieces. So, okay, I'm going to go through some questions and comments. I thought this was really interesting and a very good point. Raven Ash, hi, why do people judge when they hear pagan and think satanic? I mean, I guess
Yeah,
I could
that's
speak to that
interesting.
because that's something I grew up with. Is like, and honestly, I have to fight it because, like, if someone walked into this room right now and put a Ouija board in front of me or tarot cards or things like that, my first reaction would be like, my pearls, and then I'd be like, you know what, it's fine. Like I know that it's fine now, but because it was so beaten into me that, like, Santa was bad because that's a pagan thing, and Halloween, we weren't allowed to celebrate Halloween, and so my kids
Mhm.
never did trick or treat until we left the cult. So I think it's just a weird fear, like you said, and pagan, isn't it basically the worship of nature?
Well,
Mhm.
paganism is an umbrella term, basically of European pre-Christian religions. So almost every ethnic and tribal person in Europe, Celtics, Germanics, Turkics, Uralics, like the Hungarians and Finnics and whatever, all had a version of paganism, including the Romans and the Greeks. So Roman mythology, Greek mythology are considered
Mhm.
pagan. It just means that they're polytheist, and they also probably do have some animism, which means they might believe, like in our indigenous peoples of North South America, Pacific Islands, etc. They may worship nature or hold that like nature has some kind of soul or spirit. Why
Mhm.
they're considered satanic is because the Christian churches deemed it that.
Yeah.
And when the pagans were forced to convert from the Romans and then later on the Germanics peoples like the
Mhm.
Teutonic Knights, they basically said, having multiple gods is
Mhm.
satanic. So they decided that the gods that they were worshiping were satanic in nature. as opposed to
Mhm.
the one God, or the Trinity, I guess I should say, which was holier. I do want to make the statement here that as someone who's Jewish, we lived among polytheists in the Levant, in Arabia, and so forth for thousands of years. And because we don't look to convert people, we started off being what are called monolatrists, which means that we believed in our one God, but we were okay with other people's having multiple gods. However, there was always conflict. It didn't really matter. There's always conflict when people get in there, but it's really a Christian thing, and
Mhm.
also an Islamic thing, because one of the things that Muhammad did, he went really much after the pagans when he converted and stuff, especially in Mecca and
Yeah.
Medina. So, in my opinion, like, we have pagans that's still around in Hungary. They have their own churches, and they worship the gods of our Hungarian ancestors before we became Catholic. And most of those gods come from the Urals, and they come from the Turkic peoples. But what do they do? They sit around fire and they have some rituals. I mean, they're very peaceful. So anyway, that's my two
Yeah,
cents
I
as
mean,
a
the
Christian.
Ten Commandments says, thou shalt not have any other God before
Yeah,
me. Thou shalt not make a
yeah,
graven image. And I think that's where that
yeah,
comes from, is the idols and things
exactly.
like that. And idols was a very bad
Yeah.
word. And because
Oh
we
yes.
believed in demonology and all that,
Yeah.
the spirits and vice versa, the idols and the gods of old, like Baal and different different gods from the I forgot what it's called.
Well, Babylonians,
Yes,
Assyrians,
Babylonian. That's what I was thinking.
Egyptians,
Yes,
a
yeah.
lot of, yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar, all that. Yeah,
Yep.
and Jezebel, my
Xerxes was the
favorite.
god. Yeah,
Yeah,
the Persian Xerxes was both an emperor and a god. So
yeah,
yeah, like, they
yeah,
also
and
worship people, right? Like humans
yeah.
as
What
well.
what we what we were taught was that that Satan was like the god, Lucifer was the god of this world. So anything that was
Right.
worldly or pagan
Yeah.
or things like that were satanic, and I think that's
Yeah.
where. Yeah, and then we had things like the Satanic Panic in the
And
70s and
that is a
80s.
Christian. I just want to mention too, that is a Christian teaching, just because a lot of that stuff that again comes from the New Testament Christian Bible,
Yeah,
we don't necessarily have that in Judaism. So I know it's a little strange when people hear that we don't have Satan or Lucifer in
yeah,
Judaism. That's a little weird for people, but it is a thing. So just, again, I always say that just because I think sometimes there's a little misinformation on that. Doesn't mean that we're better. I don't want to make that claim, but there is
mhm,
a difference. That's all. So
mhm.
yeah, a lot of that stuff comes in like Revelation and whatever. That's
Yeah,
Christian.
oh, yeah, yeah, and
Again, not to absolve myself of
there's things that are
anything, but
drawn from the Old Testament that are kind of, like, blown out of proportion,
anyway, yeah,
taken literally,
yeah.
like,
Again,
yeah,
it's yeah. We've talked about literalism.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do a talk on that sometime. So we got nebulous. We are all someone's daughter or someone's son.
Yeah.
Everyone is someone. That's right. That's why somebody should always help everybody. I love that. That is so true.
Right.
AB, survival of the fittest. Yeah, we were talking about, the survival instincts of
Would have been
just kind of
hard to
grouping
survive.
together. Yeah, yeah.
It
This
would
is
have
a
been
good
very
point too.
difficult.
James Steele, he brought up the sports. Now it's like 90s was big in the UK for band rivalries. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
That's a really good point, because really good thing that for me to think about, because I'm kind of in that scene, not myself, but my boys are
Mhm.
on the younger spectrum of the local band scene, and
Right,
they play
right.
classic rock. So a lot of their fellow musician friends are in bands and they play similar music. They're a lot older, some of them 2 or 3 times their age, but they're very much have this camaraderie, but there's also a competition,
Yeah.
so and I know that some have looked at it like these, like, my boys are kind of up and coming and they really want to help them, and other of them are just like, who are these snot-nosed kids, and kind of like throw them aside. Luckily there's only a
Of
few of
course.
those, but I
The
remember
curmudgeons.
my son about 5 years ago tried out for a band, and
Mhm.
they rejected him, and now they're really pissed at themselves because
Mhm.
Austin has his own band now and is doing very, very well. So Oh, well.
Burma, maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Peter Anderson says, peace to you and all the Mark apostles. I love that.
I can agree with this, Peter.
Mm-hmm. Nebula says, this is trouble with Scientology's mindset. Despite all the scientific research and evidential proof, they still believe that they are somehow born more equal than others.
Yeah,
Good
it's true.
point. Yeah.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kate Delight, people forget that they are not their politics. Politics works for you and changes priorities every election, depending on what on what the society wants. You evaluate, not written rules. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about democracy, and I remember even as a kid hearing that democracy was a very delicate, fragile type
Yeah.
of government. And I used to think,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
no, like America's so strong and all this, and not to get into, specific politics, but yeah, it's like people's priorities change and the consensus changes, and that's what a democracy is about, right?
That's right.
So, I think it is scary sometimes when you see people kind of going towards one extreme, and I really wish that things were more, middle ground.
Yeah,
More
I would say too
communicative.
with democracy, like, um, it is probably uh, the best form of government that we have. It doesn't mean that it won't change in the future to something else, but it's also usually not very strong. So what usually happens in democracies is they start off usually with some kind of big event, like a revolution, or in the case of Second World War, really made democracies strong. But then as years go by, people kind of forget and they want their own way. And then that's why they lean towards authoritarianism, because then the strong man
Mm,
comes in, or woman, doesn't really
right.
matter, but they
Yeah.
just call it strong man. And they can say, I
Mhm.
can solve everything for you by doing these things that circumvent democracy. And it starts to sound good because in democracy, you got to wait. You might lose. Your team doesn't always win. And there are things that people want now. And that's what the authoritarian person guarantees, left or right, by the way, doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
And so it is fragile, as you say, and unfortunately, I think in a lot of places, people is becoming a lot impatient, and they're forgetting those lessons of history. So
Yep.
it's really sad, but hopefully, we get back on track soon. I guess.
Yeah. I'd like to see a little more cooperation and meeting in the middle.
Yeah,
Doesn't seem to be
nice.
happening now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, thank you. That's what she said. Putting in some hearts for Joel. Love Joel. Terry Sue, my mom will root for the team in a championship match like the Super Bowl based on her political views of the area where the teams are from.
sometimes I do that too. What city do I like better?
Oh well, I have a confession to make. Sometimes it's just basically their uniform, their little,
Yeah,
colors and outfit.
yep,
Like I like purple,
yep,
or I like to root for the underdog. I just do,
yeah,
I just kind of willing them to win. But I'll be honest, this is probably going to get some hate mail for me, but because I live in New England, our one choice was New England
right,
Patriots, right? And
right.
Boston Red Sox because we are a pathetic, self deprecating people that are always just gluttons for punishment. So
Yeah.
you got to be a Red Sox fan, even if they didn't win the World Series for 100 years.
Well, at least they won eventually,
Yeah,
right?
eventually they did. Was it
Eventually.
2004? The Curse of the Bambi, Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right. Yeah, that's right. I
yeah.
remember that.
Kate Delight, hate is rooted in fear. Education is the key. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
We despise what we don't understand, what we're afraid of. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really sad, but
Hmm. Duncan says, "Hey, no politics, cutting sheet metal." Okay, well, watch your digits.
okay, Duncan.
He's a very calm, mellow person until you get him talking about something he's very passionate about.
Yeah.
And right now, yeah, I was like, we have to have some blocked words sometimes. That's why we do like maybe every third
Mhm.
day we will watch the whole news circuit, talk about it. But sometimes I'm like, okay, why did you talk to why don't you talk to our friend Kathy? Because she'll listen. They'll go back and forth like, I can't believe it. But I have enough in my head right now. It's like I get really overloaded and kind of upset. So yeah. In
Yeah.
doses. I can handle it in doses. Oh, okay, this is interesting question. I don't really know the answer, but Kristen F. Question: why have you chosen to focus on philosophies of essentialism and constructivism? Uh, I can't even pronounce that.
Epistemology, yeah.
Es-
Epistemology.
Epistemology versus something like materialism, metaphysics, ontology, and thanks for the book suggestion.
That's a great question. I'm probably a little bit more versed in epistemology. When it comes to material metaphysics, ontology, I'm not as well versed, but it doesn't mean that I can't be more well versed. Of course, I do know what materialism and metaphysics do mean, at least the basics of it. But I find myself being more gravitated towards the epistemological stances. It's just something, for whatever reason, sticks more when it comes to materialism and metaphysics that doesn't stick as much. So maybe selfishly just out of interest, but now that you've
Mhm.
proposed it, I will go back and I'll do some more learning
Kristen,
and
I hope
reading, and
you're,
we can talk about it in the
yeah,
future. Yeah,
definitely
it's a great suggestion.
join his channel because you do some polls about
Yeah,
what you want people want you to talk about.
right.
So
That's
definitely
right.
subscribe to
Yeah,
Mark Turry 123 and
yeah, and I appreciate that,
yeah,
Kristen. Thank you.
awesome. Great Gig in the Sky. When I quit regular TV news and started watching English speaking international news on YouTube, I realized how much the old news was just a political, money driven echo chamber.
Um,
It's been eye opening. Yeah, I agree.
yep,
I've done the same
that's
thing.
what I learned in media. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I spent long time in media. So, yeah.
yeah. AB, I don't know do the news. It's too peoply out there. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Kristen, she has some great questions. Are you referring to the two political extremes in the U.S. specifically and only? Well, and somewhat, but not
Well,
only, right? We're talking about a lot of
so
different.
the US seems to be, because it's the most popular, and obviously probably most people here on Maryland's channel and my channel are American, so it's just easier for example. But you're 100%. Great Britain, or should I say the UK, has polarization problems right now. So does Germany, going through a big one. France and Italy are going through a big one. I'm in Hungary. We are going through a big one because the
Mhm.
government just canceled Pride, which we have a Pride parade, and they just canceled it. So there's a lot of stuff going on around the world, not just the
And
US.
this
But
is
again,
in
it's just
Hungary.
in terms of people.
Is this in
Yeah,
Hungary? Really?
yeah. Victor
Wow.
Orban, yeah, Victor Orban and the Fidesz Party just passed a law that this year they're outlawing the Pride Parade, which number one is the largest Pride Parade in Central Europe, and number two, often attended by people who live in countries that can't openly be LGBTQ plus because of
Oh,
arrests or because of execution. And
that's
it's absolutely disgusting and absurd. It's won't people think of the children? And it's horrendous. And I never thought that would happen because, over, Orban's been prime minister for 10 years, basically, or maybe more than that, 15 years.
mhm,
He's never canceled it until this year. And in two other cities, in Pécs and Szeged, which are major cities in Hungary in the south, they also have pride parades. And they've gone on, peacefully, despite having no support from the federal government. But it's not good. And so again, we are also experiencing polarization. Canada, I know the Canadians out there like to say, no, not us. You're experiencing polarization too. I know that you are, but regardless, it doesn't matter. It's something that is affecting everybody. And as I said, we're only really using US examples because I think most people here are from the United States. And even if you're not from
right,
the United States, you probably get a lot of media through osmosis from
mhm,
US. Like everybody knows who I hate to say again if anyone here is Canadian, but most people know who the president of the United States is. Not that many people know who the prime minister of Canada is, but also they probably don't know who the chancellor of Germany is or the prime minister of Hungary. The United
right,
States, for better or for worse, is an example we can all go to because we all have some kind of knowledge.
yeah.
But
Well,
again, please
this
understand that
time of
it's
day,
happening everywhere too.
yeah, this time of day we do have some UK people and people in Germany and
Yeah,
other
of course.
countries.
Yeah, again, I'm
In the
not saying we
religion,
don't have international. Yeah,
but yeah, it is
but again,
mostly,
it just seems to be the example that people can gravitate
yes,
easily
it
to.
is
But again,
mostly US. I
yeah,
think it's
but that's all.
80%. Yeah, 80 to 90%. Oh, sorry, we have the overlap here with the time.
Well, good. Yeah.
Yeah, we always have that
But again,
delay.
it's just an easier example, but again, we can get into all that kind of stuff as well
Yeah.
as it's happening
I
everywhere.
gotta put this up. This made me laugh.
Sure.
Nebulous. When you live in a kingdom, you are ruled by kings. When you live in an empire, you are ruled by emperors. When you live in a country, you are ruled by.
Yeah, that's a good old English word that they can say in England and Australia.
They
We
say it
cannot
all
say in
the
North America.
time. Oh, like
Australia, they say that in Australia, like every second, third word is that word. In England and I maybe New
yeah,
Zealand.
my British
Any New
friends.
Zealanders,
Yeah,
any Kiwis,
my
yeah,
British friends do.
out
I was like,
there. But yeah, in the definitely in England and definitely in Australia, you could get away with that. Not like I want to say it. I'm just saying you can get
oh
away.
my
I know
Now I'm kind of used to
it's
it.
a
That
good one.
slips out of my mouth sometimes. My kids are like, "Mom," I'm like, "Sorry, I hear it all the time."
I
I'm like,
actually swear a lot less than I used to. I used to swear so much, especially Scientology. One thing you'll know is Scientologists, every second word out of their mouth is a swear word.
mhm.
I've cut back a lot. The fact that on streams that go over an hour, I might only say one swear word or two swear words is pretty miraculous, especially just a few years ago when I would just every other word, especially when I was a teenager in college, etc. I used to swear so much, and I don't know why. Maybe because I'm getting older, it's not as like rebellious to swear anymore. Nobody cares, right? And so
Right.
I'm like, one or two swear words in an hour is like it used to be 50 back in the day.
That's funny. Well, yeah, no, I
Yeah,
wasn't allowed to swear as a kid, so it was like this thing
right,
that you did for rebellion. Oh, thank you so much for
exactly.
the super sticker, Kristen F. Thank you so much. Hey, Marilee. Hi there. I live in one of the largest cities in Canada, but our neighborhood is a community where people help each other. We have a tribe with different faiths and political opinions. I love that. Yep. That's
It's
my
a good one.
experience
I
as
like
well.
that too.
Yep. Yeah. In Carnosol, the big issue with TV media is that it has all become tabloid to draw ratings rather than taking a
Mm,
neutral stance that typically doesn't drive traffic. Yeah, I totally
absolutely.
agree with that. Yeah.
Very
And
good
that's
point.
just unfortunate, it really is. So thank you, everybody. We had a lot of great feedback. I'm sorry if I didn't get to some of your questions and comments, but it was a small group, but a very active
You.
group. I love these talks that
Yeah,
we
thank you
have.
so much, everybody. I like all the responses were really great. And again, anyone on my channel, hop over. Thanks for watching
Oh,
on my channel if
absolutely.
you're
Yeah,
on
let
there.
me
Thanks
put
for
that up
watching
again.
here. Been
Mark,
fantastic. Yeah.
yep, Mark
Also,
Turing.
Marilyn, we still have to do, doesn't have to be next week, week after, whenever. I know that we
Okay.
still have one more, the Jewish history to go through. So whenever that is, we'll obviously get in contact with each other.
Yep.
And just
Yeah,
before
I
I
do want to
go,
keep going with that.
um,
I'd like to kind of lead into
of course,
the breakdown of different Christian denominations and how that evolved, and eventually, the break off kind of culty aspect of it as well. So,
of course.
yeah, and I'll definitely put them in a nice playlist so that it can kind
Mhm.
of go in order there. So, all right, I am
Perfect.
going to play our outro. Thank you, everybody, for being here
Thanks,
today,
everybody. Yeah,
and
thank
we
you,
will
Marilyn.
talk to you all later. Bye. Zenu, Marlene, everybody partake. Cheers. This is good coffee. This is why, my hubby makes the coffee.